Well, that alternator's not charging. Alright, we got the battery out. We got it on charge. Talk to you a minute. This has probably got to be right at the very top of a mechanic's absolute most frustrating thing that we can deal with. And that is these aftermarket parts that just don't last, they just don't hold up. Automotive industry, we've got to do better. This is an alternator. I hesitate to say from where, because my son works there. It's supposed to be one of your best alternators. It didn't even make it just barely over a month. I took the original alternator. You see it's haired over, it's gross, it's greasy, it's nasty. So I'm thinking, while I've got this truck apart back when I did the cylinder head, that I was going to do myself a favor and go ahead. It's got 170,000 miles. It's getting on up there. I'm thinking I'm going to go ahead. I was having a little problem with the starter, so I knew I needed to replace it. And I said, just for good measure, I'm going to put a new alternator on there, and I'll be able to go and drive and not have any problems. Nope. Well, I don't want to get on a rant, so we're just going to dive in here and take this alternator off and go back to the store, get it swapped out, probably for another one that'll hopefully it'll last more than a month this time. But what this brings me to, I'm going to disassemble the factory original alternator from 1997 that hasn't been touched, hasn't had anything done to it, and was charging just fine. I'm going to take that alternator apart and see if it needs anything. Like if it needs some new brushes, I'm going to replace the brushes. Generally with these Hitachi style, and this is a Hitachi brand alternator, generally speaking, what generally wears out in them, sometimes the bearings will go bad. I've spun this alternator here, and the bearings feel fine. So many times you can disassemble it, pack some fresh grease in these bearings, and it'll go on and live just fine. But generally the only thing that really ever goes wrong with these alternators that I have found is that the brushes will wear out. So I've got to try to find some new brushes, because I have a feeling that is what I'm going to find worn inside this alternator once I get it torn down. So with that said, it's going to take me a few minutes, just a few seconds for you. Let me get this old new alternator off and get ready to where I can take it back and get it replaced. And sure as those words come out of my mouth, the rain started falling. And there we go, through the magic of editing. Alternator's off. Now, let's get to the store and see if they've got a replacement. Alright, so we made the run to the parts store. We've gotten our alternator. We've put it back on. We've put the battery on charge for about 2 hours. I was doing all my running around and taking stuff apart. And that's what brings me to this quick tech tip that you must follow. It helps extend the life of your alternator if you can get your hands on a good one. What happens is, if your battery is not topped off, if your battery is low, but it's still enough to crank the vehicle, as soon as that alternator begins to charge and the battery is low from the get-go, it sends that alternator into full charge, okay? Causes too excessive heat, and it's just going to shorten the life of the alternator. People don't understand, an alternator is not designed to charge a dead battery. An alternator is designed to maintain a good battery. That's why it's important to make sure you always have a good battery installed in your car. So to bring it a little closer, I'll show you my meter. I've got it set up here. Just pulled this thing off the charger. You can see it is at 13.10 volts. The minimum you need to have your battery at before you begin to try to run it, it's about 12.6. Do not try to charge a battery with an alternator that is below 12.6 volts. I mean, if you're on the side of the road and you have no choice and you're just trying to get home, yeah, that's fine. But as soon as you get home, you need to hook up a battery charger and top that battery up. All right, let's crank it up and see what we got. Looking pretty good, 14.25. turn on a few accessories and see if the voltage continues to come up. So far so good. It's maintaining. Let's see if it'll continue to maintain. Turn on your blower motor on high, your high beams on, and see if it'll continue to charge. Dropping on off. Be happy if it's stabilized there. Make sure I got a good connection. See if I give it a little gas, if it'll come back up. Nope. See if it's ever going to stabilize. Steadily falling. You just can't get anything good anymore. So discouraging. I'm beginning to smell heat coming off that alternator as it's trying. Turn everything off and see if it comes back up. The headlights off, air conditioner off. Alright guys, well it's the next day. We moved inside the shop. Boy, do I need to get in here and do some cleaning up. It's a disaster. But I got enough room. Got my portable workbench. Got in here where we can work. Where you saw me leave off yesterday, excuse me, got a little cold or something going on here. But where you saw me leave off yesterday is I didn't like how the reman alternator, which is the second reman alternator I put on this truck in a very short period of time, just didn't like the way it was charging. I'm going to take apart the OEM original factory alternator, and I'm going to inspect a few things, and I'm going to look into the brush holder and the brush kit that's in here. And I did a little research on the internet this morning. I should be able to buy the brushes and be able to replace them. That's what I'm thinking. Because with the Hitachi alternators, I found this to be true with the Hitachi alternators for years, going back to the 70s, early 80s, that the rectifiers, the windings, and all of the bearings and stuff that are in these factory original alternators are really high quality stuff. And generally speaking, all you need to do is repack a little bearing grease in the bearings and replace the brushes. And these alternators just keep right on going. They're well built from the beginning, and what they do in the reman part aspect of it is they just toss the rectifiers, as best I can tell. They just toss the rectifiers and throw a new rectifier in, and they're junk. Just plain and simple, they're junk. They just don't last. So let's get into it. Enough of me blabbing. Let's take this apart. Pretty simple, straightforward. It's on this particular one, it's a 24 millimeter nut here, and there's some screws. I think it's 3 or 4 screws going around the body of it. It's a 8 millimeter head. So take me a couple of minutes, only be a few seconds for you. So let's get into it. Well, after a lot of tapping and banging and beating and knocking, I put the nut back on the front because getting this rear housing off was proving to be a real challenge in trying to hold it and get it to come off. So what I did was chucked it in the vise, and you can spin, you can go around the edges and tap up gently with a hammer, turn, tap up gently, turn. You get the idea. You get the idea. Just keep going round and round and round, and eventually it'll pop off. So I did go ahead and get it apart. Did inspect it. We'll talk about the brushes in a minute. We're going to set that out of the way. But we've got one of those womp, womp, womp moments. Try to get a side angle. Come on, there we go, focus. You can see the groove all the way around. And that ring right there. This is garbage. You cannot reuse that. If I'm going to do a little looking and research and see if I can find these rings, because they look like they're just pressed on. See if they're replaceable. But let's go sit down at the bench and we'll talk about the brushes. All right, well, as you can see, there are the brushes, and you can see that one is sticking out slightly further than the other. If they were both the same length as that lower brush down there, I would probably pack some wheel bearing grease in these bearings and would probably clean this thing up and put it back to work. But seeing as how that brush is very much approaching the end of its service life, I've got to do something else. So exactly what, I don't know yet. That's yet to be determined. All right, so we did a little more screwing around. We did it off camera. The Hitachis are not that bad to work on. These newer models are a little more tedious than the ones I used to mess with. On the older ones, they're still doable in the home shop, but they're a little more tedious, so just know that going in. What I'm seeing with this one, I don't know that I'll be able to do a whole lot with this alternator. It's got a ton of miles on it. But what I did find in my research was that this alternator ran from '94 and they used it for till 2004. So you got a good 10-year window there. I may try to slip out to the junkyard, see if I can pick up one off a slightly newer truck and bring it home, tear it down, and maybe I can put together something with OEM parts while used and just install a new set of brushes in that alternator and be able to get it back up. So in the meantime, why don't you go out and watch another video coming on the screen right now.